This is a book published by the World Bank in this year. It's called Making Schools Work, New Evidences on Accountability Reforms. This book is available online also at the World Bank, and you can have a look at it. And I'll just pass it on if you like, you can flip through it while I talk about it. Just pass it on. What I'm trying to do is I try to locate the intellectual and institutional dimensions of the accountability perspective, and to also compare them with other approaches, other ways of looking at how to get public institutions to function. Now, most of my discussion will be about schools, but perhaps many of these ideas can be transferred to all kinds of public institutions, how to get public institutions to function. Now, the study of schools as organizations in India has very few people working on that. It is an extremely important area because eventually whether a teacher performs or does not perform, whether a teacher finds teaching exciting or not, is very heavily influenced by the school organization. It is possible for individual teachers, we find heroic examples of individual teachers who overcome school organizational structures and still perform. But this becomes the major factor. How does one imagine how the school organization operates? Is crucial to understanding how schools perform or don't perform. It's not the only thing, but I'm saying it is a crucial thing. Now, for example, how we imagine, how we theorize, how we imagine, how we model the school organization has very different effects on the kind of strategies we take. For instance, if we see teachers as ordinary employees, the way firms have employees, who are expected to do what the school authorities want them to do, then our attention turns to the ways in which employees are made to follow orders. Authorities want them to do something, how do you follow orders? This will lead to asking how their salaries are ways of pushing them in certain directions. There can be another way of conceiving of teachers, which is we may see teachers as driven by the meaning of their work and actively seeking better communication with students, which is a very different kind of action than an ordinary firm employee. Such a model of the teacher will lead to asking how the intrinsic meaning of teaching can be enhanced and how more dialogic relations can be established. There can be many other combinations possible, there may be a combination of these two poles and all, but how we see the organization of a school is crucial to how we see what we need to do about schools. Now, there are several microsociological and organizational models available. One way of classifying them is drawing from Max Weber, and it is a reasonably popular way of classifying different approaches, is to distinguish between technical instrumental approaches towards organizations, technical instrumental approaches, and cultural political approaches. So on one side, technical instrumental approaches, on the other side, cultural and political approaches towards understanding an organization. Now, technical instrumental approaches tend to highlight the use of rules and compulsions. Technical instrumental approaches tend to highlight the use of rules and compulsions and of setting up formal systems which nudge actors towards a certain set of choices. Now, these have drawn from different discourses, with the most widely known being what has been loosely called new public management. And it's a cluster of ideas, a cluster of doctrines has been called new public management. This has strong roots in neoclassical economics as well as in a narrower form of political science. It claims to be a solution to the problems of the traditional bureaucratic paradigm through two important strategies. NPL focuses on two things. One, it focuses on giving greater choice to clients of public services, and two, it focuses on weakening the self-serving tendencies of employees. So greater choice and weakening autonomy of the worker. The Solutions which has proposed have focused on rational choice making and on creating the conditions which will direct people into certain pathways. It is argued that since public institutions like schools share the characteristics of private institutions, many of the same processes and methods can also be used in them. The concerns and directions of the top, this is a classic model of the firm. The concerns and directions of the top are expected to be implemented by employees in efficient and competitive manners. The strategies it recommends typically include measures like restructuring remuneration, the capacity to recruit and discharge staff, detailed surveillance of behavior and outputs, and so on. Classical. This is being expressed in several ways by the new public management approach. Now, the cultural and or cultural political approach is relatively more sensitive to the norms and traditions which shape organizations, as well as to the distribution of power within and without them. Organizations are believed to be formed not just by formal rules and norms, but by the cultures which emerge within them. Actors have bounded rationalities and articulate particular understandings of the frame of reference. Individuals and groups take initiatives within organizations under the guidance of their own norms, as well as from their corporate political interests. The goals of the top are not the only points of consideration, but must jostle and coexist with the goals of other participants in organizations. The measures taken from the point of view of this approach include, if one is to improve school functioning or any functioning of any organization, would include efforts to build cultures, organizing teacher education, and setting up processes of dialogue and discussion. So very different strategies. Teacher and student identities and the processes of identity work are seen as integral to how teaching and learning takes place. Improvement of schools takes the form of the cultivation of commitment rather than, say, greater scrutiny of what a teacher is doing and rewards or penalties for the same. A drastic overhaul of an institution in this second kind of model would entail a grasp of its politics and a struggle to rework it through relationships and cultures. This clearly calls for quite a different kind of imagination of what works and what does not work in comparison with one which looks mainly at salaries and rules. Now, in practice, most institutions will find there will be some combination of these. It is completely possible for improved teacher education and the building of professional pride in teaching to go alongside more selectively directed teacher salaries. However, as Paul DiMaggio and Walter Powell famously argued, the isomorphism of organizational structures is often spread through individuals and groups who move to other sites and try to create there the forms they were themselves most familiar with. These constitute myths or intermeshing systems of ideas how things work. Whether those things actually work is not the point. Do people believe they work is the point, or do people move? So what is important for the survival of a myth is whether it is able to persuade enough people to believe in it. Its correspondence with reality is usually not the only consideration for its survival. Now, the technical instrumental approaches, not just so many people argue, have gained an ascendance under a globalizing political economy, especially with the enthusiastic propagation of NPN by the World Bank and IMF. In our generation, international bureaucracies have gained considerable visibility in the domain of education. Institutions like the World Bank embed a largely technical instrumental perspective, and that has become quite influential in shaping how national bureaucracies of education across the world, including in India, formulate the challenges they are faced with and the solutions that they propose. In contrast, the cultural political approaches are less well organized and have fewer political, powerful champions. I don't want to say that the World Bank is monolithic. or the IMF is more looking at all kinds of voices over there. But a general tendency, if one is to argue, this is what I am suggesting it is. Now, what is this accountability framework? It talks of an accountability framework which is being accepted more and more broadly in Indian education NGOs as well. What is this accountability framework? A document which is referred to a lot by the World Bank is its World Development Report 2004, which is said to be the standard reference for the accountability framework. And it is this particular document book which I am passing around claims to use. I would argue that there is a difference, however, between what the 2004 document is saying and what this is saying. Now, this particular image is from the 2004 World Development Report. The World Bank's accountability approach works through an abstract model. It proposes an abstract model of what it is that makes public services deliver. The term accountability is used not in the general sense that we use as just answerability or whether an institution can be held to account, but in a special sense. It refers to 5, and is defined it. When we talk about accountability, we are talking about 5 intertwining processes, which together decide whether an institution delivers or not. The 5 processes being delegation, which is asking a service provider to do a particular job, nominating officials for that and so on. Financing, ensuring that sufficient resources are available. Third, performing, the actual doing of the task. Information and assessment of the quality of the performance of the task. And I'll just come to this. And enforceability. So here you have the major principles. This is the language that we use. I'll come to this language later. The major principles. Here's an arrow going this side. They are delegating certain tasks. They are financing it in a certain way. And they are getting back a certain performance. An arrow in an opposite direction. They are getting certain information back. And then they are giving a feedback to this, which they call enforcing. Is what we want happening or not. Now, as a framework, it's an abstract framework. It can have many interpretations. And in the parent document, the interpretations are deliberately kept loose. And they say that it is not claimed to be an explanation of everything in the world. It is said that many things can happen. And yet, as a middle range theory, we can think of it as a middle range theory. It need not tell us, it is not concerned with why should a government want to deliver education. It is not talking about that. Nor does it embed within itself a social psychology that explains why the public servants do or do not perform. As a relatively formal model, in spite of this limited scope, yet it has certain advantages. Its advantages are that it helps us to recognize a wide variety of processes which have different kind of driving intentions or pressures. Amongst the gaps in this model are the absence of competence or of cultural knowledge from the parameters which decide can a public service actually deliver. Nor is the connection between accountability, this entire formal model, and the broader processes and institutions of democracy ever made clear. Now, even so, now the virtues of this model is that it helps us to examine it. What I will argue is that when you come to the specific applications of this, much of that ambiguity focuses down onto one particular interpretation rather than other possible interpretations. It is possible to have this thing and to interpret it in a variety of fashions. They give it one particular interpretation. And the interpretation that they do give is as I'm arguing, connected with a technical instrumental approach. Now, it is not, again, I want to say that the World Bank's document is not very clearly or explicitly dogmatic. It's not dogmatic. For example, it does not say that privatization is the solution to all problems. It does not say that. It does not even see the public sector as the root of all evil. It argues that governments must run services and this must continue. And there is no question of replacing government-run services. And at the same time, there are also benefits to strengthening client voices. So it's not a dogmatic position. It accepts that all over the world, historically, it is the shift from privately funded education to government-run education which has led to the universalization of education. It argues that wherever universalization of education has taken place, it has not taken place through privatization. It is the reverse which has created universalization. It is accepting all of this. It also has a prudent and a cautious approach to examining which administrative technique works and which does not, and under what conditions success or failure was obtained. However, at the same time, after all this cautious balancing of advantages and disadvantages has been done, what it does seem to be more sympathetic to is school choice and incentive-based teacher motivation. In contrast to other possible methods which could have been to set up better run public schools, public funded schools, or to cultivating cultural processes which lead to greater motivation. Now, this particular, so there is the parent document has a much broader approach, and still within that one can see certain traits. When one comes to this particular document, that broader approach narrows down considerably. This document is a summary of 22 studies from 11 countries, in which they asked the World Bank. It's very, one has to admire the organization behind it, the abilities behind it. They took a framework, and for about 15 years, they ran a series of studies in a variety of countries, using more and more rigorous research methods. And this book is a summarization of those studies. And here it is that the assumptions become far more clear. One of the assumptions I want to show through a diagram which they had. Yeah. I don't know if you can read what is written. Okay, I'll just let me see if I can increase the zoom. Is it possible to read now?
Yes. Yeah.
See, what we are saying is that, there is a long route and there is a short route for getting public services to deliver. They say, yes, we agree that the long route is that you have citizens and clients, they impact the state. And they impact the state through politics, and finding more of a voice for themselves, getting that voice to be heard, and the state. And the state puts different kinds of pressures. It has a compact with providers. And this is the good way. In the case, we are saying this is the good way. But this is a long way. Instead, we want to take a short way. And what is the short way? The short way is that we can be, they don't use the word market. But see how they're describing the short way. Let me just read that. Getting the clients to themselves interact with providers. That is the short way. And it is, and the example that they give is, for example, they say, look at a restaurant. When you have clients operating with a restaurant, that is a direct feedback to a restaurant to perform properly. Now, they don't use the notion, they don't use the word market, but the implication is clear. And this is the long route. Yes, it's nice, but it's too complicated and we can't handle that. Instead, we use a direct way. The direct way being direct feedback by clients, citizens and clients to providers. And there are certain problems in the vision which this embeds. I'll try to bring down those problems. So the communication systems which draw from models of economics and of economic actors prevail. Political processes which can convey the voice of the underprivileged, or political institutions and organizations which amplify that voice. We know historically that market processes will listen more to those with more money. Political processes have been one way by which people who don't have more money can still get themselves heard. That's historically been the significance of politics as a counterpoint to the market. So, political processes which convey the voice of the underprivileged, or political institutions and organizations which amplify that voice, are only a thin, hazy part of the solutions. Similarly, cultural processes which build commitment or a worldview that guides action are not central to the way the authors find worth following. Commitment to the processes of incentives defined as money or vouchers or promotions is considered relevant, but not commitment to teaching per se. At the conceptual level, there is difficulty in recognizing and planning for processes that incorporate the dimensions of politics and culture. Now, the main chapters of the book, one can cluster into three themes which are central to the way they are imagining accountability, which is the use of information for accountability, one. Two, decentralized school management. Three, the use of incentives for teachers. I'll quickly summarize the kind of results which come in. They're interesting. They've done their work very honestly. Where they are having problems, they are very honestly reporting those problems. And the kind of things. Take, for instance, information and accountability. And there has been so much talk about testing as a form of creating accountability in schools. Now, the literature that they review suggests that in countries like the US, UK and New Zealand, this has been a very established and widespread practice to have various forms of testing-based school improvement programs. The authors on here say that in spite of all this experience, the evidence in favor of testing is inconclusive and ambiguous. Not just that, the ambiguity is that some studies are saying that improvement does take place, some studies are saying that improvement does not take place. Not just that, in UK, a highly regarded study suggests that as a result of testing-based school improvement, underprivileged students may actually be doing worse than previously. Now, this is a World Bank document saying this, and I respect their honesty. They have various studies from third world countries also. For example, a study conducted in Chile which had a very well-developed school voucher system. They also looked at the effect of newspaper publicity over there, school results being publicized through newspapers, and awards for high-performing schools. This, however, did not show any improvement in learning outcomes or on the choices being made by teachers, by parents. In 4 studies conducted in middle and low-income countries, India, Pakistan and Liberia, different kind of information was provided to parents and teachers over periods from 3 months to 2 years. No sanctions were imposed on poor performers, nor was any explicit incentive offered. Just information was being provided. In 3 out of the 4 studies, some small improvements were observed. Now, from this, what the authors draw is that information is not enough to change schools all by itself. Several factors seem to go into whether information can be effective in actually improving the teaching and learning in schools. Information may be conveyed in a vague or incomprehensible manner. It may go to schools which have little power to change their own conditions. It may not go to the people who actually have the power to change their conditions. The famous example one can give, one can tell a poorly trained maths teacher that, look, your children are failing. That doesn't help the maths teacher. The person still doesn't know how to teach better. And yet the problem is, and this is, I think, typical of the pattern, they accept that these all problems are there, and yet this does not lead the authors into a search for a conceptual scheme which would supplement or enhance this accountability framework. And this is one of the arguments I will make throughout, that one of the problems here is a very weak theorization of what is happening. So they are finally coming out with results which are not matching them. They do have a theory of what works and what doesn't work. They are going out there, they are finding results which are not matching that, and yet they are not trying to expand their theoretical model. And there are very, as I just argued, and I will argue further, I will give some illustrations. There are some reasonably comprehensive alternative theoretical models which don't just look at accountability in a narrow economic fashion, but use other models. But they are not moving into that. And this, my point, that a reluctance to expand one's models is one of the bottlenecks over here. The reluctance to expand one's theoretical understanding is one of the bottlenecks over here. Now, similar results are coming out of the school-based management approach, which has been promoted tremendously by the World Bank. In India, it is often called the community-based school management kind of thing. Now, what is the argument which goes behind this? The argument is that governments are corrupt. Now, we are not going to try to improve the government. We are not going to try to change the government. We are not going to try to do very political things over here. Governments are corrupt. So, what do? Cut the connection between the government and the school. And this is what they propose. And they say this explicitly. And if that is removed, if the government's connection with the school is removed, then we have three players, three stakeholders over here, which is the teachers, the management, and the parents. And it is hoped that if the government does not interfere in this, that is the hope that they have, these three players, stakeholders, will find some combination which will make everything all right. So, they say that each of these major actors may have been a different direction with a corresponding hodgepodge of results. It is possible that the principal and the school administration may constrain teachers so much as to hobble their function. The teachers may consider their own interests more important than those of the students and the community. The community may air its own views on education and obstruct the teachers and the administration from doing their job. All this is possible. Or it is possible that a balance may be struck. And the accountability approach's hope is that remove the state from the picture and automatically somehow a balance will get struck. How it gets struck, they never spell out. They keep saying, yes, there is some politics may happen over here, yes, there may be some other factors, but they never get into questions of local power structure, they never get into questions of professional competence, they never get into questions of politics. Now, they review literature from a variety of countries. They point out that in countries like Australia and USA, it takes 10 years for decentralized school functioning to begin to show results, but it shows results. In Australia and the US, it shows results. In third world countries, I'll just quickly read out the summary of the results. in 3 older studies which allowed at least 8 years. So one of the arguments is that maybe it takes 8 to 10 years for countries to settle down and show results. Amongst those countries which had at least 8 years of time for things to settle down, Brazil showed no improvement. Whereas the implementation of these reforms in Nicaragua and Mexico did lead to an improvement. Studies taking up a randomized controlled trial approach found that in El Salvador, which had a strong form of school-based management implemented, including the power to hire and fire teachers. Schools got the ability to hire and fire teachers. School attendance improved, but learning outcomes did not improve. A study in Nicaragua found that where school autonomy was more in the law than in the practice, no difference was to be found in learning levels. However, where it was actually found to have been implemented well, there was an improvement in promotions as well as maths and language in primary school and in language in secondary school. So it's a complicated result. Language improves in secondary school, but maths does not. Language and maths improves in primary school. How to understand this complexity? Now, the authors, even in talking about school-based management, accept that there can be social and political processes which defeat or severely limit SBM. However, the implications of this for the SBM perspective are not noted and are not explored. There is little effort to build a model of school organization which center stages political economy or social structure. Given the strong obstacles which are noted in certain studies, this is a frustrating shortcoming of the accountability of framework and casts a long shadow over its relevance to the real world. The last example and the last kind of chapterization which they do is the use of teacher incentives. And here I'll just show you the way they formulate teacher incentives. I'll just increase this. See, they say that, can you read what is within the boxes? They say teacher performance, yes, teacher performance incentives are made up of lots of things. We have intrinsic motivation, we have the desire to respond to client pressure, we have mastery over the subject, we have adequate infrastructure and teaching material, we have the desire for professional growth, we have, do people get a proper pension and benefits? That also affects teacher motivation. All these things affect recognition and prestige. But the only things we will study are bonus pay and job stability. Now, why? They don't explain why. Why? Why not study the others? And that is, here, I keep asking myself, why do I study only this? And in the absence of a technical explanation for that, I can only fall back to say that this is an ideological position. It's a position which is coming out of their own training and their own habits. That this is the only thing works. Sorry?
They ban people.
No, but they're accepting. But then they accept that it doesn't work. When you see the results that they tabulate, they're honest people. And I don't. So what does this do? This at various places it makes some differences. At some places it makes no difference. What they also point out is that contractual teachers. So it's a matter of talking about contractual teachers as the solution. Contractual teachers seem to work only if the supervisory authorities, education bureaucracy or local community, actually put teeth into their supervisory practice. If they are not adequately supervised or if poor learning levels have no repercussions for teachers, then contractualization as a process does not seem to work. But when they are actively punished for not performing by being thrown out, then it seems to make a difference. Now, this incidentally, there's a major difference between the results coming out of developed countries and developing countries. In developed countries, it seems that contractualization makes no difference to school performance. By using not contractualization, by using bonus pay, so not contractualization, bonus pay techniques. I think if you get higher scores, you'll get a bonus. The studies that they are reviewing say that in developed countries it makes no difference. Whereas in developing countries, it seems to make some small difference. How to understand this? One of the possibilities is that in developed countries, people or in developing countries, a bonus pay is perhaps sufficient for teachers to begin to come regularly to schools. And maybe just that coming regularly to schools leads to an improvement. Whereas it can't take them to the next level. I mean, offering a person a bonus pay cannot teach a person who's struggling to teach maths, cannot teach that person to teach maths. So, my last 10-15 minutes I want to spend on the alternative approaches which are being, and which this perspective is keeps touching at different places but never begins to expand upon. Now, the book has many strengths and many weaknesses. An honest and meticulous narration has been done of results from the reviewed studies. The conclusions drawn from them have largely been parsimonious and cautious. The failures of efforts coming from an accountability framework have been recounted along with the successes. What is particularly praiseworthy is that authors have also tried to ask why those efforts failed. They tried to ask why did this not work? Albeit from the point of view of a rooted common sense, they don't read theory. They don't read other disciplines. Unfortunately, the narrow range of the theoretical apparatus deployed by them often prevents the implications of the failures or the partial successes from becoming the basis of developing a revised and more comprehensive understanding. An interesting aspect of the book is it's repeatedly making the point that it speaks on the basis of evidence. This is mentioned in the subtitle as well, and thus impartially claims no more and no less than what the evidence says. There is an emphasis on the use of randomized research designs and a focus on identifying causality rather than just correlations in the various factors at play in the cited studies. At the same time, there is a striking focus on only one set of claims for which evidence is sought. For instance, there seems to be only one way of encouraging teachers to perform better, that of giving them promotions or financial incentives. It is as if there is no other way of looking at teacher motivation, their identities, their cultures, professionalization, and so on, as if no other way had ever been proposed. And I mean, there are 150 years to how many years of people working on these things. Why have they not looked at those things? The questions which guide the research designs then inevitably bracket out ideas and perspectives which pose competing descriptions of how schools work. What constitutes evidence thus seems to reinforce only the author's own preferred mode of action. The rhetorics of empiricism and impartiality may strengthen their confidence in their own conclusions, but the large gaps in their theoretical models seem to belie that confidence. The biggest shortcoming of the book then may be that it tends to see rigor only in terms of methodology and not in terms of an exposure to literature, or of looking at different theoretical perspectives which seek to understand organizational functioning. Consider, for instance, and this is at the end of the book, it says, what is our main model of what drives human action? And this is a version of principal-agent theory that sees organizations as driven by the interests of principals, the people who own or are the central people behind them. So all organizations are driven by the principals. A principal as P-A-L, not P-A-E, principal, who are mainly concerned with somehow coercing their agents to abide by their will. This works pretty much in a capitalist firm. But to use the same model in other kind of institutions, in passing, it is mentioned that other conceptions of human action also exist. They accept that. They say that yes, some people say that agents are being driven by cultures. Some say that agents are driven by professional dedication, agents are driven by respect, and so on. But however, the text then just carries on with its narrow model of action without enlightening us why it chooses to work with that particular model and ignores the rest. It may be, I'm willing to be open to the question that maybe this is the best model, the principal agent model is the best model, but please justify it. Give some argument. And it simply goes on to propose that parameters of predictability, controllability, and bonus sizes are the key to getting an incentive-based system to work. Now, not only within, it does not look at other perspectives. Within its own tradition, it is not looking at other perspectives. For example, there is a lot of sophistication on principal agent theory within public choice theory. Even that is largely kept out of the picture. Now, other models. How does one begin to think of other models? Within the new public management tradition, there is the founding documents, which is often referred as Christopher Hood's paper of 1991. Now, Christopher Hood, following down the new public management tradition, I was looking at the paper and I was taken aback. Christopher Hood is saying that, look, I am following one tradition, but here are two other traditions which are possible. What are the other traditions? He's saying that there are different clusters of values through which administrative reforms have to be judged. And I am following one cluster, but I am also accepting that there can be other clusters. For example, he's saying the first cluster is what he calls sigma type values, emphasizing lean and efficient organization. I am talking right now about these, lean and efficient organizations. But there can be other kinds of organizational goals. For example, there are theta type values, which emphasize honesty and fairness. And he says that that will lead to a very different kind of organizational functioning and structure than an organization which is only interested in leanness and efficiency. If you are talking of honesty and fairness, we have to talk of other kinds of procedures. These procedures are not suitable. Similarly, if one is to talk of the third kind he mentions are lambda type organizations, which prize robustness and resilience. This again will have a different kind of organizational design than one which is prizing leanness and efficiency. Now, without disparaging the work and effort put into this book, one cannot help but also feel that a more useful way of doing an empirical study would have been to compare the claims of different frameworks, rather than to say that job stability, remove job stability doesn't impact education or doesn't impact teacher performance. Could we compare, say, job stability with, say, desires for professional growth, or compare job stability with the effect of giving recognition and prestige? That would have been a more productive kind of a research design. But that calls for leading theory. Now, and other kinds of normative systems, people have tried to document other kinds. It is often said that new public management is the only framework, but there are other, and people like Louis Cassino-Weiss has argued that several other kinds of normative systems continue to be present in administrative systems across the world. And she has looked at the administrations of Norway, Sweden, and the USA, and she says that there are three normatively guided drivers of administrative change. One, the demand for greater social equity, which leads to more inclusive hiring and promotion strategies. The desire for greater social equity, very different kind of a framework. And it's a normative framework which can shape how you want to change an organization. Two, demands for greater democratization and empowerment, which work towards greater participation of not just the clients of public services. NBM is talking about the clients having greater choice, but they're arguing even within different layers of the organization, it sees movements towards flat hierarchies and greater employee involvement. The third set of normative drivers is demands for humanization, which see employees as well as clients, not just clients, employees too, as human beings with several dimensions of their existence and needs, and trying to make institutions places where people can grow and find fulfillment. Here is another way of thinking about organizations. And one may again refer here to one of the classic statements in organizational theory, which is the classic statement by Tom Bruns and G.H. Stalker of 1961, who say that we have two kinds of organization depending on the kind of requirements. One kind, what they call mechanistic organizations, will be organizations where a person has to do a highly predictable work. The same thing has to be repeated again and again and again and again. And it is there that it is possible to take low-skilled people, keep them under control by various technologies of violence, including firing them, controlling them to salary measures. And this works quite well for those tasks where the person does not have to use their autonomy too much. It is possible to work out, this is what is to be done, this is what you have to do. These are mechanistic organizational designs. This is compared by Bruns and Stalker with what they call organic organizational designs, which is where one has work tasks which cannot be carefully planned out. So the worker has to have a lot of autonomy, and has to have a lot of training and commitment. Because the worker has to make a lot of complicated choices in performing that task. Now, such organic organizational designs call for flat hierarchies, call for situations where every day new challenges are coming up, no single rule book will work. It calls for much greater participation compared to the first. And here a focus on commitment, building of commitment as the motivating force, rather than incentivization through money. The first works with mechanistic organizational designs. For organic organizational designs, a different kind of a structure is found. And in this, Brian Rowan had surveyed in 1990, 22 years ago, he had surveyed the results of school interventions which focused on these two very sharply different models of how to improve a school. He compared the command and control system of managing schools with commitment-based systems of school improvement. And his conclusion was, driven to their extremes, both work. If one is having a teacher who is under enormous supervision, enormous surveillance, and is immediately penalized for mistakes, and is immediately rewarded for doing things right, he said, one has seen several studies which say when done in a very strong fashion, it has an effect. School learning is improved. But he's saying that there are also the other kind of examples, where you have schools where a lot of commitment is created, where a lot of intrinsic motivations are created. There also we find learning levels increase. It's the in-between situation, where mild combinations are tried, where problems are there. So, which to choose out of these models? That is basically a function of one's broader value structures. Does one choose command and control system, or does one choose commitment-based structures? So it is quite conceivable that the organizational techniques examined in the school will have an effect on improving school functioning. I'm sure they will. However, it may equally well be that the models excluded from the revision are what are crucial to building better schools. For instance, the processes of building commitments and cultures among teachers may be the preferred strategy to take. Or it may be that creating and strengthening organizations and structures that convey parents and educational professionals' voice to the state is something without which a ceiling will soon be hit. Or there may be intrinsic reasons to strengthen the growth of political organizations which can put pressure on the state to perform, rather than relying only on administrative procedures like incentivization. Now, the book does not get into these questions. And in this, one of the last points I want to make is that there has now developed a considerable amount of literature which points to the blind eye which is turned towards politics and political economy by such administrative reforms. I just want to make one point on this, then I'll stop. Which is, other people argue. For example, there is an excellent review of the new public management approach by a group of scholars, including somebody called Box, that the distribution of power and the related political processes are actually at the heart of debates on schooling and the place of education in a democracy. It cannot be talked of, it cannot be understood without talking of power and politics. The difficulties of technical instrumental approaches with equality and justice are tremendous. It is argued that the new public management approach bypasses the question of democracy altogether. Or rather, at least it bypasses a substantial democracy. It emphasizes procedures over the substance of justice and equality. Its narrow approach can be counterproductive to its own aim of involving local communities. Because if you want to involve local communities, one has to ask, which part of local communities' voice do I hear? Local communities don't speak in one voice. Some places which are relatively egalitarian will speak in one voice. But India does not have egalitarian local communities. Whose voice? And how does one negotiate that difference in speaking abilities? So, it actually carries forth the separation of the community from administrative machineries. As an alternative, it is recommended that one builds participative administrations, not efficient administrations only. One has to build participative administrations. And this would imply a different approach to building institutions. For instance, setting up offices that support neighborhood organizations instead of building a public relations office. Or making local problems the basis of building school infrastructure rather than distributing resources equally across all administrative units. Changing the education system of a country then necessarily needs to go beyond the education bureaucracy itself. The building of a healthier political economy may call for the cultivation of groups, parties and processes which reshape the ideologies and the structure of power. For many who are deeply concerned with education, this is a troubling but unfortunately inescapable truth. To sum up, the basic limitation of the accountability approach for all its virtues, it has virtues, as expressed in this particular book, perhaps is that it sees institutions in too narrow a manner. It is aligned too closely with knowledge traditions that come from a concern with controlling members of an institution, so as to get them to follow the will of their master. However, there are also other ways of imagining the purposes of institutions. Who the master is may or may not be something which can be divorced from the question of whether the resources and whether the distribution of resources and cultures in a society is just. It's not possible to separate this question. Thus, the structuring of institutions may itself be a way of furthering justice, which may be a different and somewhat contradictory goal from efficiency. Further, institutional life may also be an end in itself, with the quality of the lived experience of its members being an important consideration, along with the services being provided by the institution to society. One can't say that let the workers be paid a minimum wage and below the minimum wage The important thing is what service it is providing to society. They themselves are also important parts of the process. Dehumanizing work processes may indeed work, and that's what some students are saying, they do work. They work when dehumanization is carried out to a high degree and through close surveillance and reward and punishment measures. However, the cultivation of humanity may also be a strong reason to search for and build other kinds of measures. It can also be a way of creating well-functioning schools. Those employees too, after all, are a part of the better kind of society which we seek to create. Thanks for your patience for a very long talk. Now, if you have some comments, one of the options is that I think you get some tea and coffee also outside. So if you like, you can pick it up, and those of you who would like to continue the conversation can come back, or we can. How would you like to?
Try coffee with
So we can take
the third world countries like Brazil, Nicaragua, and places over 8 years to see the effectiveness. Did they also, in countries where they observed that improvement has been made, did they see what kind of incentive or what kind of motivation methods worked there?
Yeah, they very much did that. They were. This is the Brazil example is from. Just a second. Brazil is for the school-based management. So it's these were done in a fairly rigorous manner, in the sense that they measured various parameters at one point, and then again after 8 years of inserting one new parameter, which was to have school-based management. So it was quite thoroughly done. What was not present was an analysis of, for example, over here, the political economy, and how the political economy can make a lot of difference towards whether these contribute or not, or what was not taken into account in the initial study and therefore not in the later studies. Seems to have been the question of whether people were equipped to be able to contribute to school management. Did the community have the capacity to be able to contribute? Was not looked at. So they just simply put it in and thought that, will it work? Why that was not done is the question.
And social considerations also.
No, they were not. But the argument was that here is one situation which is all that we've done is added one more factor. It's a randomized controlled trial. We've added one more factor. Does it improve things or not across the board? And the difficulty in interpreting it then becomes this: that my model of the situation is incomplete.
In management circles now one hears about this emergent management and things like that, which don't sort of come from this instrumentalist kind of view. How come those are not, those are very much, is it because they're not mainstream theories, or why is it that those things which are very much within the management discipline are not being looked at?
Well, that's a very important question. I wish I knew the answer to that. If you, a friend of mine I was talking to about the World Bank and its approach and so on, management as a discipline, and he wanted to curse it out. It's a terrible subject, only doing exploitation of workers and so on. Just hang on. Open up today any book on management, and this is what they're saying. What they're saying is people are human beings. We have to deal with them as human beings. The notion that simply salary incentives can get people to work, they discard that on page 3 of a textbook of management. They have far more sophisticated models. That's what
especially I think, a lot of deriving from John Shorter's work on dialogues and those things. So it's very strange that.
Perhaps one must also, of course, look at the fact that the management theory is one thing, but how they actually live it out in institutions can also be a different thing, which is the other challenge. But yes, I'm quite puzzled at this. So why don't those ideas come out of it?
Even there's a very nice initiative in rural Finland. It's state psychotherapy services recently called Open Dialogue, where they've seen an unheard of reduction in rates of schizophrenia prevalence because of a sort of more democratic, rankless, immediate intervention of therapists for at the first incidence of schizophrenia. And one is hearing these words. I mean, this is a government system, and one is hearing democracy, rankless listening, what do you say, ways of hearing. I mean, these are the kinds of terms which are very different from command and control.
But let me add another source of ideas and organizational strategies to the management discourse. The management discourse has great presence and great visibility. The things which we systematically erase from our memory. Finland is a social democratic country.
Yeah.
Finland has had a history of, even as a social structure, it does not have great inequality. It never seems to have had great social inequality. Finland has had very powerful trade unions, which today nobody wants to talk about, which have put enormous pressure for keeping discourses of power and inequality under control. And it is through that background that it becomes possible to talk of unranked relationships. That is what makes it possible also. Now, the contribution of those institutions.
So you're saying structures and institutions can keep certain kinds of discourses alive?
Yes. I would not be as puzzled as you are on why they are taking this approach. The second part is also, you mentioned this whole spectrum of interventions, and you have said that both seems to work and the difficulty seems to be in what to choose. I think we have to have, I am borrowing two different ideas from two different disciplines. One is the diminishing utility. So I'm probably guessing, this is a hunch, there might be a diminishing utility applying even to learning. As you go into higher and higher levels of learning, the interventions might have lesser and lesser utility, marginal utility. So comparing interventions across regions doesn't make sense to me. Interventions have to be pegged on the current level of learning. This brings me to the second concept, which again I am borrowing from psychology. It relates to zone of proximal development. As an individual, we apply zone of proximal development to learners. Similarly, for even reform in a social or organizational sense, it needs to be within the zone of development there. So pitching, I'm going back to your Finland thing. I would say that Finland would have no meaning to me in India, because the reforms and interventions there is way beyond my zone of proximal development. So if we try to see these two things and look at the same kind of interventions, probably something more meaningful will emerge for individual regions. I would not even say nations, because even within India the variation is so much.
I didn't spend much time talking about why it's needed, but yes, it is, of course it's needed. And I tried to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is efficiency is a concern, and absolutely it has to be. But for me, what I'm trying to say is that efficiency has to be balanced by other concerns. And how does one think of that? That is the point I've been trying to make. And my point is that that balance is not being developed. And in that connection is the points I'm trying to make. The question of in the Indian context, cultural and political solutions may not be as effective as, say, economic or incentive-based solutions. It's something I would like to. I'm open to. I can't say I have enormous empirical data to prove that this can happen. I don't have that. I have a set of theoretical understanding and some experiences, and which is notoriously subjective. What I'm arguing is, let's begin to examine that question. This study and this group of studies not even asking that question. It doesn't want to ask that question. Let's ask the question. For example, I would be very happy to see studies which compare incentive-based efforts in improving schools compared with other kinds of ways of improving schools. This is something I would be very interested in.
Actually, AP REST, for example, conduct, I think probably World Bank quotes from that. It's a World Bank funded study.
It's one of the things good.
Yeah. So there, I would not say the rest of the part is completely ignored. The design of the study is in such a way that you have a same pool of money. The control group gets that money, and the school decides how to use it. The intervention or group gets the money for incentive pay. And empirical evidence shows that where it's based on incentive or not just given on money, the learning levels are improving.
So I don't know the details of that particular study, and I would know more. But let's take another argument, which is that there's a reference to management doctrines. Management doctrines are largely tending towards the argument and management doctrines, and they are on basis of a variety of studies across a variety of organizations. That incentives, how do incentives matter? For example, they are saying it's a relative incentives within the institution which seem to be making more of a difference rather than the absolute. Secondly, it is, for example, this is all ordinary management textbook stuff. That when the cultural meaning of my work does not matter, when the satisfaction of my work does not matter, that's when I fall back and say, okay, at least I might as well get paid well for it. So how is one to build that into this framework? Now, I don't know the details of the AP risk study. It is completely possible that it is, I'm willing to believe that it is working with by not just saying that we put in this much money and this effect is coming. It's not doing that. But how is it understanding the rest of the dynamics? That is the question. And how do we, what I'm arguing for is developing this kind of an understanding. Developing an understanding of how groups perform by moving beyond a purely incentivization kind of approach. That is what I'm arguing for. I'm not sure, it is possible, I'm not sure that incentivization can be completely removed from the picture. I'm not sure. There are some people who argue that incentives, we create a group in which everybody gets the same kind of salary. And will it work? Will we be able to have other kinds of incentives, rather purely financial incentives? Move away from purely financial incentives into other things. It will work, I don't know. But let's talk about it.
No, also my main claim is that I'm not even making any generalized claims about incentive. What I'm saying that we might have to be, we might have to think of where in the, again, utility curve the learning levels are. incentives might work till a certain stage of improvement, and it might not. So I think that was already bonus pay. It shows already bonus pay in developed countries has no effect.
That makes sense to me.
Because they're already fairly high on the learning curve there.
Right. I'm with you on that. But what I would also ask you is to ask that if that is not working beyond a certain point, then what works over there?
Yeah. That is the question also to ask.
Question to ask.
And which is not there in this film. None of the other things are in this film.
No, but sometimes the wrong conclusions are made that for a context which is fairly low in the curve. Because it doesn't work in that, we should not pursue that.
No, it need not be. It need not be.
Can I ask you a question? So when people are talking about performance that improve, what finally are they measuring in all these studies?
In all these studies, they are measuring fairly simple things: language proficiencies, maths proficiencies.
Isn't that too limiting?
That is another problem. For example, they don't talk about at all about do people learn more democratic behavior or do people respect for other people. Is not part of their framework at all. Do you learn language better? Do you learn maths better?
I'm thinking that is the thing that I'm going to measure. Then of course, when you're saying that command and control works in many cases, it will work in many cases. If that is all that I'm going to measure. Okay.
I was worried. Incentive when we say, and again the kind of language that came in from when we were reading the book out and commenting on that book was contextualization of teachers. I would like to understand an ambiguity that happens in a language here. In a political economy situation where a teacher with the same qualification, having entered the system 10 years back, gets a salary, and 10 years down the line with the same qualification, the guy who is an expectant to get an entry in the system knows that there is a disincentivization because he is not going to be offered that salary itself. So his own expectations or his own bargaining power having so limited then, and having got into the system at a salary which is lower than the same qualified guy who has entered the system 10 years back has got, and he is aware of this. And then you come with a randomized evaluation study or whatever statistically stratified methodology and tell him that you are going to pay him rather than 3,000, 4,000 rupees if he performs better. Will we call it incentive in true linguistic sense of the term and true semantic sense of the term is something that I don't know.
Look, I understand your point, and I agree with the absurdity you're pointing to. Compared to the situation where a person was, where we create a teaching profession, teachers are paid on par with many other people in today's world, and there would this kind of a model job will we draw the same conclusions from it? Possibly not. And because in that case the nature of the system itself will be different. The significance of that agreement will be different. The kind of people who will be coming in, the kind of competition which would set in for getting people in over there would be quite different. And if people were to argue, and as some of them argue, not all of them, some of them argue that look, yes, 3,000, 1,000 is too much. It's small increments, maybe 200 rupees, 400 rupees. See, this proves that if you give incentives of a fiscal kind, then teachers will teach better. Now, that kind of a generalization is problematic, is deeply problematic. And which is why the way to step back, I would feel that the way to step back is to step back and look at this larger picture, rather than just this, is to look at and then to try to understand what does one mean by incentives, what does one mean, what motivates people to work in certain situations where I agree with Ram that it will not be a linear line of effects of any particular thing. There may be all kinds of complicated interactions. But let's open that up. Let's bring that into our model. That I'm with you on that. There's an absurdity in the claim that by taking an extremely low-paid teacher and giving that person a small bonus, and then to draw the conclusion that look, this is proving that financial incentivization works. It's a very partial argument. I agree with you. Right, I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.